Welcome to the Electric Art Podcast, where we delve into the explosive intersection of creativity and technology shaping our world today. In this episode, we embark on a sensory journey with Barnaby Steel, an artist and creative mind behind London's groundbreaking experiential art collective, Marshmallow Laser Feast. Barnaby's artistic vision transcends conventional boundaries, drawing audiences into realms where perception expands and the lines between our senses blur. His work is a symphony of art and science, offering glimpses into the hidden complexities of our universe through the lens of scientific observation. Marshmallow Laser Feast's work has been exhibited internationally, from London to New York and from Melbourne to Seoul. So a warm welcome, Barney, to the Electric Art Podcast. What corner of the world do we find you right now?
Hackney Wick, East London, a damp Hackney Wick.
You've been travelling all over recently.
Yeah, there's, we do quite a lot of touring shows, and at the moment we've got Evolver at Cannes Film Festival.
Yep.
And so that's a nice place to head out to. I did a road trip to take the projection, all the gear out, and I've been sort of setting up out there and getting hoovered into the Hollywood glitz and glam. It's quite a scene out there.
What an experience! How long are you out there for?
Well, the work's going to be there. It's for the whole festival, so it's about 2 weeks, and
Yep.
And it's part of. There's a whole group show, so there's a bunch of different immersive pieces, really diverse range from sort of immersive projection pieces with spatial sounds and some HoloLens stuff, which is really fascinating as a technology. And we've got our virtual reality piece, Evolver, which is, we'll probably talk about it, but it's the journey of breath. What if you could breathe yourself into your own body and just glide on that river of oxygen all the way through lungs, heart, up into the brain, and eventually down into a breathing cell. So it's a stoner classic.
Oh God, I felt pulled in already as you were describing. I was feeling it definitely. Just going right back to day one. What inspired the creation of Marshmallow Laser Feast? How did you guys come together?
Well, partly myself and Robin, we kind of created chaos bombs, and we had previous companies that were wonderful, more focused on sort of live performance and theatre on Robin's side, as well as VJing, and I was maybe more focused on animation and photography, and then a bit of live action. But when you've got business partners, then it's much harder to do pure artwork that takes investment, because you're essentially channeling money out of the profit of the company into your passion projects. So when me and Robin met up, we were just sort of these passion-powered pooches, just sort of foaming at the mouth, wanting to just like push limits. And we kind of fell in love and did a project together that was this crazy projection on mobile phones thing. It was a commercial project. And it did really well. And so we decided that we would start a company, but the essence of Marshmallow Laser Feast was that we would take low salaries and invest in our passion projects. And everyone has to be on board with that, because it's full commitment, but also you're really nurturing, as an artist, you're nurturing your curiosity, and you're also upping the quality of how you spend your time. You're moving away from solving other people's problems, which is like the advertising model of getting a brief and offering a solution to a brief, towards, I guess, putting your mind onto like, why would I do anything in the first place? What is it that sort of tickles my fancy? And that might not be clear at the beginning, but over time, that process of nurturing yourself as an artist and investing in that, then it sort of blossoms in unexpected directions. So basically MLF is this sort of passion project where we just dove into a transition from maybe commercial work into our own artistic practice.
And it must be a quite tricky bridge to walk down in some respects as well. But it's such a sweet spot, such a brilliant place to be, where you have this untamed creativity at the same point, which drives you, gets you out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, so I wouldn't want to paint this sort of picture of us finding this spot where we just get up and we're just following our urges, and we do a lot of commercial projects. But what happens when you make an artwork and you put it out into the world? It People obviously see it and they come to you for that kind of work. So even the commercial work or the commissions starts to align more with the underlying ethos of your artistic practice. And so that kind of feedback loop has been like really great for us. And we're probably doing 50% commissions and then 50% self-initiated works, and still heavily investing in our self-initiated projects. And often there'll be a development phase that we're doing under our own steam, and you get to a point where you've got something that you can show people, and then you go out to try and raise funding to do the grand vision.
Just moving more into your work with just looking at the themes of nature and connection, art, science, life, death, and obviously technology as well. That there's so many depths here to your work. How do you, where does this idea begin? And with each installation that you have, does there have to be a feeling or a desire or a message at the heart of everything?
Well, I was on this farm in Italy, and this guy had like a whole load of peacocks, and it was sort of molting season, so there was feathers everywhere. I just got obsessed with these peacock feathers, and I'm kind of collecting them. And like, I mean, the peacocks are insane. You know, when they fully unfurl, you've got all of those eyeballs sort of pointing at you, simmering. But then even around the back, sort of around the peacock's bum, you've got these tiny little downy white feathers, and even them, they've got little eyeballs on the end. You're just kind of like, how does a peacock even exist? Like, what is going on? And I started to think, oh yeah, so there must be this like deep time relationship of the male that's got the exquisite plumage to the female. And so the female is like a deep time tuning fork for beauty. And it's her sort of, I don't know the full evolutionary story of what a peacock was, you know, a million years ago, like where it's come from. But I like to think that it was like a pigeon. But there's this like relationship of like, oh, I like that eyeball pattern. And it's like, you get this kind of, and it got me thinking about how everything is molded in relationship. And obviously it goes way beyond just the male-female relationship. It's the sensitivity of our ears, the shapes of our faces, like everything about us is molded in this sort of deep time relationship to the environment with sort of, you know, the noise of bird song, for example, like it calms us to such a deep level, because when there's an absence of bird song, it means that there's danger. And there's all these kind of like ingredients going on. And so I suppose the work has just been really diving back into that sort of baptism in being immersed in nature and thinking about maybe how a scientific lens, if you think about the world as in terms of the way it appears to our senses, then that's like one dimension of beauty. But then I think what's really fascinated us is scientific observation as an expansion of what we can see, and it's through that lens that you're able to peer into these sort of deep mysteries about where we come from and what we are. I think there's a huge sense of kind of awe and wonder that erupts from that scientific understanding. It never detracts from feeling of awe and wonder. It always adds. So yeah, that's kind of, I don't know if I answered the question. The peacocks came to my mind as you were talking, so I went on my peacock rant, but
No,
we can go back.
With people, while you were talking about peacock, I was also thinking about the sound as well. You know, what do they? Is it like it's like a meow, or this? Were you woken up by the sound of peacocks, like crying
the
out?
sound's not that nice actually. It's kind of like a moped horn or something. It's like this sort of thing.
It won with the visual. It won, but yeah, maybe not so
you
much.
can't get it all.
The shriek, can't get it all. But I just you mentioned science as well, and I mean, I love how you've got on one side you've got nature and some respects like the spiritual aspect as well as how everything is comes back to nature. And you mentioned the breath earlier to me as well. Coming in and going out, and then you have the scientific approach as well. How do you approach those two kind of concepts around the scientific approach to nature and also this kind of deeper organic more natural world approach that you're talking about?
I suppose on that most fundamental level, to sort of thread it from peacocks into this, that wherever peacocks come from, it's the same place that people come from, and sequoia trees and volcanoes and stars and galaxies, like the whole reality that presents itself to us, and this crazy wild biodiversity of life on Earth. The fact that it exists is already completely unbelievable. So whatever creative energy is unfolding in order for us to be here right now having this conversation, it's talking through my lips and sensing the world through my body and the peacock's body and everything else. So there's this kind of inseparability that everything is just nature, the whole thing. And then so science is not separate from nature. That's just like, if you're curious to understand what the freak's going on, then look through a telescope or a microscope, CT scanner, electron microscope. Wait, LIGO, let's make a LIGO. You look through these technologies that sort of expand our senses, and they tell us the craziest stories. Like, who would have thought that you're like a teeming ecosystem, sort of full of like non-human cells, and that you're like, and that under the surface of your skin, you're like a branching being who's woven into relationship with trees through breath and nutrient cycles. There's like all of these crazy narratives, including one of my favorites is the that we come from the hearts of exploding stars. That's who would have thought that one? It's the poetry of it's off the charts. So I suppose in the simplest way, it's this scientific observation is a way of deepening your connection to reality. So it just kind of blows my mind. And the process of creating the artworks that we do is often hitched on the shoulders of a scientist. So, I mean, for example, with Merlin Sheldrake, I was kind of thinking of him like a slug munching into the lettuce of reality. He's kind of like going into these corners where he's looking at stuff and chuffing away. He's looking at stuff that no one's ever seen before or measured before, and thinking about, okay, need to design a new instrument in order to look at sort of these microscopic systems within fungi and mycelium. And so he's kind of got this trajectory. It's almost like a slug's a good metaphor, but it could also be like a scalpel that's kind of cutting into the fabric of reality. And then he's leaving this slug trail behind of like eloquent jibber jabber and amazing books, but also the imagery that's coming out of it. And so I'm kind of just licking all that up, just like yumming it up and thinking about how those words and how that observation translates into an experience. Because most of the work we do is thinking about if science is rooted in observation, and a lot of those data sets create volumes, then let's spatially explore those dimensions, because you're not, through virtual reality, you're not bound to like this dimension of existence that is like the human lens on reality. You can shrink down tiny or expand to be the size of the body of the Earth. You can breathe yourself out of your body and go on the journey of oxygen. You're not bound by any rules. So in a way, you can think of this sort of the richness and biodiversity of the natural world can be represented as volumes and spatial journeys, so that you can sort of leave your body and have these out-of-body experiences through the web of life. And it's in those spaces that I think the feeling of human self-importance or the human-centered worldview sort of starts to evaporate into a feeling of entanglement and inseparability between living things. In fact, maybe the piece we made, We Live in an Ocean of Air, is a kind of really simple example of that. in that people are familiar with trees. I mean, everyone's, they're really familiar. They're everywhere. But they don't walk around. They don't feel that alive. They're comparable to sort of lampposts in a way. They're there. They're always in the same place. But if you could just see a tree breathing and also see the breath leaving your own body and flowing in, then you'd kind of be like, oh, wait a second. It's like there's this kind of umbilical cord, like a river of oxygen flowing out of the plant and into me. And when it passes my nose and mouth, it's going on a journey through my branching lungs, hits the bloodstream, round the heart, and then into every cell in my body. So if you wanted to take a portrait of me as defined by the journey of oxygen, you'd get everything because I'm completely infused in it. And then the carbon dioxide's flowing out of me into the tree. And so in the Ocean of Air project, we used a breath sensor and a heart rate monitor. Did a LiDAR scan of a sequoia in Sequoia National Park of an epic sequoia tree. And really simply, we just made that visible. So your out breath flows into the plant and starts to define the inner structures. You've got like the phloem and xylem movement and the movement of water and glucose. And then also the out breath of the tree starts to flow into the 7 people that are sharing this experience. And so when that happens, you start to see the person next to you as a kind of branching being, and their heart rate sensor is giving you. You can see a kind of particle representation of their pulse as the oxygen's moving through their body, and everyone goes on this collective journey to the canopy where you've got like serious like rivers of oxygen just like flowing into the atmosphere and into people. You all kind of end up kind of umbilically connected to the tree. And so, yeah, when we made that experience, and we had it at the Saatchi Gallery for 3 or 4 months, I spoke to lots of people coming out and we got some really nice comments that it did change. That experience changed their relationship to trees. That would be our biggest dream in a way of a kind of perspective shift or an experience where that experience sits like a lens over your eyeballs, and every time you see a tree after that experience, you're seeing it sort of through that lens. And that's probably the essence of the work is we do believe in the power of these virtual reality or immersive experiences to kind of create such a dramatic perspective shift that it can change the way you think about what you are and how you exist in relationship to the more than human world. But it's still quite niche, right? It's like we're early days on that journey. The technology's constantly evolving. Every day there's like new steps forward, but you're not reaching a mass audience at this stage. So I guess we could say that we're like Attenborough with a black and white camera filming gorillas and going, oh, it's got potential. This nature observation's got potential. In fact, the Attenborough angle is quite a good metaphor because from black and white cameras as a young man, now in his dotage, you've got this crazy evolution of the technology to observe. Lenses get longer. You can get a snow leopard. You've got drones. You've got underwater cameras, and you've got slow motions. As the technology to observe, the ability to see dimensions of nature that aren't available to the naked eye expands. Like, for example, a horse. When people used to paint horses before the camera, to the human eye, they look like they run in a certain way. But the camera revealed the true movement of a horse's legs. And probably if you're into drawing or painting horses, you've seen more horses via a slow-mo camera than you have in real life. And so probably if you were to think, how does a horse look when it runs? Then you'd probably draw the one that's through the lens of the camera. And so I think that's the sort of power of technology, is that if you're able to observe and experience nature through these mediums, then it can actually it sits as an experience that shapes the way you see the world.
I think that was really beautiful what you were saying, and it's almost like the power of art when you're looking at a 2D painting. The longer you look at it, the more it becomes an out of body experience. And I feel what you've been doing with technology, specifically with VR, you are taking people out of themselves. I remember that very early VR when I was trying it out. You lose sense of your body, your mind goes one way, and your legs are going the other way. There's a disconnection there. Well, in theory, you're connecting with your brain even more than you can imagine. You're starting to use your brain to see around you and feel. You start noticing things like in more detail that you would see every day. And I love what you were saying about the tree and how the act of breathing. If you look at the tree, the branches, the way it's structured, very similar to the lungs as well. There's a visual kind of mirror there, which I find really fascinating. But what you were saying, a connection seems a really, really strong bit about what you were saying as well. And how do you see technology connecting each other, not just us with nature, but human to human? The immersive environment. How, if we are born from a star, which I think is such a wonderful way to do it. We are all made up of stars. We are all connected. We're all equal. It's a brilliant leveler. And the role of VR when you are disconnected from your body for an hour or so, with other people. How do you see that kind of that technology kind of improving, evolving, with human to human contact?
Yeah, I think in some ways, we're masters of embodiment within our own bodies. But then when you drive a car, you can sort of expand your sense of border to the edges of the car. And actually, we're really quite flexible, both through sort of spatial relationships to like hang gliders or windsurfers or kite. There's all sorts of ways that we're able to sort of extend, even through a walking stick. There's a blind person extends their senses through the tapping of a stick. So we're quite, through our senses, we're quite able to kind of expand beyond the boundary of our skin. And it's interesting to think, well, how flexible is that? What's it like to embody something more than human, to be a tree? Or would it be like when you touch a leaf, you can you get a smell of the tree, a sense of the tree, the cool under the tree, and there's a whole sort of tree thing to be in the presence of a tree. But then you're like, oh, well, as I'm touching that leaf, what would it be like to be the receiver of my touch, to be the tree? And you start to explore those ideas. And actually part of it is that you have to kind of put a boundary around the body to a certain extent, because you could be a cell within a leaf. You could be a leaf. You could be a whole tree. You could be a forest. I mean, we're playing with this idea of, if you're lying on your back, if you've got your chest hair out, and you're in virtual reality, and you look down and you realize where all your chest hairs are, it's a forest. It's just a forest. And then, and there's sort of mountain range. So you're like, oh, this is interesting. I've turned into a landscape and I've got a forest on my chest. Then if somebody blows on your chest hair, but you see the movement of the forest in that exact area, then suddenly you're pairing a sensation to a visual stimuli and sound, and you'll start to like really drift into. I haven't done this test yet. We're just playing with the idea, but we're like, yeah, you could. What if a tree fell over and you felt a kind of tap, boosh? It's interesting to think about what it's like to be, and how you can expand and contract. And in many ways, as your gut bacteria are to you, maybe you're like a cell within the body of the earth. So everything that you're experiencing could just be like the little human flavor of perception, but maybe you're existing within these bigger, I mean, we're definitely into the land of unknowns with that, but it's just an interesting thing to think about. Like nested ecosystems, bodies within bodies, different sensory perspectives nested within different sensory perspectives as you sort of go down and in, or a bit like Russian dolls. Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
I mean, what's for sure is that the Earth is one body in that it's just one interconnected system. I mean, I'm really loving the idea that the objective worldview, which where everything is kind of, in fact, language has got a big part to do with this. But if you point at a tree and you're like, okay, that's a tree, and that's a butterfly. Well, that's just a way of using language to define something so that we can describe the world around us. So you break the world into objects and you can break it down into smaller parts in order to describe it. But actually a tree doesn't exist without the pollinator. And so where is the separation between the two? If you start following this idea of relationship, you're like, well, actually a tree is a super organism made of so many different organisms. And the same with us. You just end up with this blancmange of relationships. It's just like one massive kind of existence tissue. So when you start thinking about the world that way, then this idea of sort of self-care has to extend beyond the boundary of your skin. It's like, it doesn't make any sense to acting in self-interest has to be in the best interest of the planet and the systems that sustain life and the other life forms and the biodiversity and so it's kind of, I guess I'm waffling on into I can't remember I'm hopeless at sticking to the questions. I just kind of go into
beautiful. I mean,
meandering.
when you talk about this, it really makes me think about how to communicate. I mean, obviously you do it brilliantly with Marshmallow Laser Feast. You communicate it visually, but bringing more people into this world, more. When I say more people, I mean younger generations.
Yeah,
There's a lot of, you've got a young family, I've got a young family as well, and you're thinking
yeah,
about how can you educate, because they're getting information thrown at them. Then they've got friendship dynamics, and then you've got technology, which is greatly improved in
yeah,
various ways, positive, negative. But how do you maintain their ability to look at a snail or slug in some
yeah,
respect in a way that is beautiful and different and unique, and maintain that connection to nature, disconnecting from technology,
yeah.
or is that an impossible thing to do with younger generations?
Yeah, well, I suppose, I mean, one thing is that kids love technology. So in some ways, virtual reality is, you can maybe think of it as, it could be the darkest escapism where like your kids are just getting lost in some fantasy world, or it could be used more like a ritual or sort of baptism or something that it's something that you do. You don't do it every day. It's something that you can go into and you can go on a journey that is potentially quite transformative. I was thinking, like, come on, kids! Marshmallow Laser Feast have set something up in the school gym. They'll get in there and they put their headsets on. They're in this amazing, let's say it's a sequoia forest, and this amazing sequoia forest, and they're breathing. They can see the air flowing around them. And then they're like, right, kids, everyone lie down. Let's all lie down. We're going to take our last breath. We're just going to see what happens when we take our last breath, see what happens. All the kids lie down, they're looking up, and they take their last breath, and they see that leave their body. And then time starts to accelerate. Woof, woof. You can imagine like the sun moving through the sky. So it's like woof,
Yeah.
woof, 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 woof. There's a certain point when you're filming a car wheel that it stops moving forward and kind of finds this sweet spot in line with the frame rate of the camera. It kind of stops and almost goes backwards. So you can sort of get into this tree time space where like it's not day or night. It's kind of like this in between where day and night are just shimmering, like start to like unspool. All the branching networks that were dynamic and flowing with blood and movement have come to a stop, and they start to break down and flow out through mycelial networks into root structures. And so you kind of have this unspooling, and you get to, I mean, it might be a little bit scary. It should be a little bit scary actually for a moment, but there is this kind of metamorphosis thing going on where the ingredients for life, like everything that you were, gets like broken down into smaller and smaller bits. It's almost like a soup of potential that's then flowing to become the life force of new things. And, you could flow up into a tree, and there's a whole load of branching journeys that you could go on there. But this idea that the present moment of all living things is built on the death of everything that's come before. And so life isn't just this bookend of you. Life is the sort of collective tissue of existence that's constantly, your cells are constantly dying, there's new cells being born. So it's not this like black and white bookend. And it's just really healthy to sort of, you could also, the death becomes life experiences is one thing the kids could try. It's like sneaking magic mushrooms into the school omelette or something. You sort of go, hey kids. But one experience we really want to make. So we've done like out breath of the human into the forest, this sort of journey of breath. And that was ocean of air. And then we've done the out breath of the forest into the human ecosystem, which is Evolver. Yeah, maybe I'll talk about Evolver quickly, and then I can go into this like dream project that we want to make, which kind of ties this journey of breath together. So yeah, if you were to follow the out breath of the plant kingdom into your body, then you've got this passing. Well, the first thing is, what if your whole body was invisible and all you saw was the oxygen? So imagine your cardiovascular system, like all your airways, your lungs, all of your blood vessels. Imagine those tubes are there, but they're just invisible tubes. And so we're going to see the particle system, the oxygen flowing through the nostrils and mouth, down into the lungs, diffusing into the heart. And actually the heart's data that we got was from the Fraunhofer Institute, MAVIS. And so that's from an fMRI sequence. They were able to create a data set that tells you the speed and direction of blood flow through the heart. And so we can use that to drive our particle system. And that was a really beautiful moment for the project because it's big. The whole human body, we made it like 100-foot tall so that it feels like you're made of rivers and streams and like huge trees, and you're kind of branching being. And so this heart data, like what can be more familiar than your own heartbeat? It's something that for every moment of your existence, it's accompanied you. But even like the first moment that the lights go on, maybe when you're like a zygote within your mother, you've got her heartbeat there, like thundering away. So it's not a moment of existence like without that rhythm. But what does it look like? The most familiar thing that you've never seen. So to see it was like, whoa, it's like a pen pal that you've never met them. It doesn't get everyone, but it got me. I was like, there's something very beautiful about it.
Is there like a slight fear? Do some people does it freak them out? When they hear their heartbeat or when they suddenly ground themselves with their breath. But I can imagine, feeling your heartbeat again, you think, oh, I'm alive. And there's this kind of moment where the world stops and it's almost a feeling of being out of control. Do you get, from some people who've experienced your works, this fear of like, oh, that really freaked me out?
Yeah, I think it's sort of open enough to affect people in a really diverse range of ways. I think some people have got very emotional, especially if they've lost loved ones recently. I mean, within the artwork, just the fact that you're representing the human body as a river, immediately that's a perspective shift that breaks away from the kind of static feeling of you're sort of a skin encapsulated ecosystem. And so we're not witnessing how dynamic we are just under the surface, or that our branching patterns are a big clue to the fact that we're not too distant from the mycelium and the forest. We're really all made of the same stuff. So within that, those streams come from somewhere and they go somewhere. And so it's a shift away from you as an object to you as more like a whirlpool within this stream of life. And I think even there's a part of the journey where we got this amazing data set from the Allen Institute. So it's like a volumetric scan of a cell. And so at the end of the piece, you're moving towards this breathing cell. And so our fluid simulation is moving through the sort of grayscale volume. It's like an electron microscope, sort of multi-layered scan. And it looks a lot like a sort of nebula or a sun or something. It's got just the sort of variations of densities around it and the way that we're pushing the oxygen through it. And in some ways, I was thinking fluid dynamics that you see in everything. It's almost like movement and energy. It's kind of like the spirit of all things, that energy that flows through all things. So seeing yourself as made of fluid, and maybe recognizing the vastness of the cosmos within a cell in your body, kind of, that was. I mean, these things. It's not like you set out to do that. You set out on a journey of discovery, and you don't know what it's going to look like. So you're just going like, well, who's looking at what? Cells, Allen Institute, let's talk to them. Blood flow, Fraunhofer Institute, You get to Frankenstein this thing together, and then you're just trying to stay as true to the source data as possible. And the beauty comes through that. And then the sort of, so it's interesting the way these projects sort of come into being, because it's more like a scientific process to a certain extent of just seeing what you can see and exploring and diving in, and it kind of directs itself. And that project, you arrive at this sort of breathing cell at the end, and whilst doing the research, we realized just one cell is like a teeming mega city. There's so much going on when you get into kind of like proteins and DNA and the whole. It's like, whoa, there's a lot going on in the cell, and a really diverse range of cells with different functions. But the one thing that was really interesting was that the oxygen, this journey of oxygen, it kind of arrives to be reunited with the hydrogen that it lost through, it got parted from the hydrogen in photosynthesis. So if I just rewind a bit and we go on this journey of breath, but starting in the plant, you can imagine that you've got a photon of light traveling from the sun. What would it be like to be that photon? That's a wild ride, because if you travel at the speed of light, time stops as well. So there's all sorts of interesting concepts. Being a photon, like a wave and a particle, travel towards a leaf. But what if you're a raindrop, actually? Yeah, a raindrop would be good. So you start in the clouds and you hit a few leaves and you condense onto a tip and you drop into the soil and you get absorbed into a mycelial network and you flow into the root of a tree. Merlin was saying that where the mycorrhizal fungi in the root of the tree kind of touch, they have this chemical conversation, and then if the tree decides that it's a sort of friendly fungi, then it softens its root to let them sort of interpenetrate, and this is this kind of exchange of fluids that goes on. So you could pass through that sort of interspecies intercourse thing, really liquidy. You get squirted, you go up into the tree, go on this journey upwards to this sort of vertical elevator, and then out into a branch. It's almost like passing through a cave, and then out into this green cathedral with the transparency of the leaf, and that the leaf could be electron microscope scanned at like the highest possible resolution. So maybe the cells have got the kind of detail you see in St. Paul's Cathedral. You know, you're coming out into this cathedral of green light with cellular symmetries, and you're sort of shrinking down and moving into the chloroplasts, and then you get to what I've heard described as photons smearing into probability waves. A scientist, I can't remember the guy's name, was saying that in order for photosynthesis to be as efficient as it is, the photons have to hit the energy centers in the leaf with almost like 100% efficiency. And in order to do that, they need to be like smeared out into a wave, which I think of like that kind of Akira nuclear bomb moment, that's sort of expanding out, but maybe mixed with the northern lights, kind of shimmering caustic light that's sort of expanding out. And then when it works out where it needs to be, or whatever, I don't know the terminology to describe that, but it's like, oh, all my energy is going to focus here, and it goes and splits. If you're a water molecule, it splits you in half, and you're like, what? That could be, if you're in virtual reality, you could have a Dyson hand dryer in front of your face. So in that high energy moment, you've got like heat and wind that goes straight down the middle of you. Half of you, the oxygen goes out into the air. And then the hydrogen part goes through this kind of marble run where it gets woven with carbon dioxide into glucose. And the way that this is described to me is that the energy of the sun is woven into the bonds between like the hydrocarbon bonds. So it's almost like sugar or food, yeah, essentially all food contains the energy of the sun trapped in the bonds. And so that trickles off, and let's say it ends up in an apple. If you eat that apple, then it's going to go, the food goes into your gut, it gets broken down, and when it arrives into your cell, the hydrogen is really keen to reconnect to the oxygen. And so the oxygen comes along and kind of breaks the bonds, which releases the energy of the sun, which powers life. And then what happened in photosynthesis is just undone. It's the opposite. So you get a bit of water made and a bit of carbon dioxide. And so that whole thing that the plant kingdom managed to do is they're taking cosmic energy from the friggin' sun and then powering the whole food web through that process. That all of life is woven out of sunlight. Like the energy of the sun powers everything. And so when you start to think about yourself and existence in that way, then the trees are like these high priests. They're like these ancient beings that are the foundation of life. I mean, obviously not the tree. Even just saying the trees is a total doozy, because you need it all. You need the pollinators, the mycelium. You need the old growth forests. So yeah, so suddenly like you're not thinking about a tree as a lamppost or its value as a commodity, as a chair or as wood or a table. You're thinking about it as this crazy living being that's got this mad trick and that you're existing as a consequence of that process. Without that process, you're not here. In my mind, to be able to go on that journey of breath with photosynthesis as like this central point, and to be able to explore it as a photon, as carbon dioxide, water, oxygen, and sort of cycle through these webs of relationship. If you could offer that to kids in school, it would just completely transform their lens on everything, I think. And like that's just like one like there's so much detail I've been trying to like map out on that journey. So I feel like we've done a few tests and we're early, and that's that's the feature film. That's like the epic mega experience that I'm itching to make, and I feel like we're making momentum towards realizing that vision. Also waiting for the technology to catch up. Yeah, maybe in 5 years it'll be happening.
Yeah, what will it be in 5 years? But yeah, it's that feature film sounds like life generally, and it's just look in the tree. You just have to walk out your front door, and you have a tree right there, and everything you described is just happening in this world around you. And kind of like moving from kids to adults, how do you maintain that open mind to what's around you, before you get plugged into this like everyday routine? How do we connect back with nature? And through projects that you're doing, this is a nice like open door for people to reconnect, reopen their minds. How do you share this direction or this ambition with collaborators? How do you find these collaborators? Like you mentioned Mel and Sheldrake, but there's the poets, there's the scientists, there's the sound artists, the musicians as well. How do you what are those steps that you take with collaborators when you sit down? I've had this idea. How do you get everyone on the same page?
Yeah, I guess I don't see myself as a salesman, but in some respects, I'm like a PDF machine and a salesman, like going, I mean, that rant I just gave you about photosynthesis, it's like once I've got a vision, I'm trying to like visualize it, and then I'm doing research to try and build a mental picture of the whole journey. And I've got like big black spots. In fact, it's a really good example. When you dig deeper, 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 smaller, you find that photosynthesis is described with like thylakoid membranes and ATP, and that the language is so beyond any reference point that you need to study it in order to understand the language that describes what's happening. So I've kind of got to that point where I'm like, whoa, this is getting a bit hardcore. I don't understand the words, but so I'm on the hunt right now. So I want to be like, okay, who out there is firstly able to translate the observation? Like maybe what's happening on a kind of molecular level is maybe beyond what can be seen, but people have a clear enough understanding of it that they could sit down with us and our 3D artists and we could describe that marble run of what's happening. And so it's exactly that. So it's like I need a collaborator for that smallest part and the mechanism of photosynthesis. And I also want the same thing as respiration in the human body. So they're like very specific things. So I'll start by just reaching out to scientists we've worked with before to try and find a connection and just do some research to try and find the right teams to support that bit. And
Tricky.
it's all vision driven though. So you start with the kind of, and that we'll have decks, razzle dazzle decks that show what it's going to be. So, for example, with the vulva and the human body, we created a 3D render of a giant cardiovascular system with really small people walking around it, and straight away it goes up. I'd love to take a stroll through the human body, like I go walking my dog in a forest. Yeah, I could spend time doing that, and then that's kind of like the seed, and then hopefully doors open, and because then you can send someone something quite short, they look at it and they're, oh yeah, I'm interested, and then it's like fishing, you need to do a little something first that people can sort of latch onto. So I think, yeah, but there's always that, and then also projects that aren't, I think some projects just want to be birthed into reality, and then if something isn't resonating, you can always drop it. Like if people aren't interested, maybe it's too complicated or it's not working, you sort of get a feeling for the ones that really want to happen, and then they're the ones that really take off.
I love it. I just got a vision of you going with your collaborators, sitting in the forest and just literally connecting together your brains, your emotions, where it's that everyone is like living and breathing the same, kind of concept that's in your head.
Well, that would be nice. Often it's just like a call like this on Zoom and we're all in our little buckets doing us. Really, really. But sometimes that has happened and I want to make it happen more. But yeah, it doesn't always go that way.
You need to get those peacocks.
Yeah, got to get
your own peacocks.
Yeah, those peacocks.
You mentioned your dream projects as well, and I suppose like dream collaborators. Are there dream collaborators out there? You feel that I'd love to, see what happens if we go down that route. But could you tell me a little bit more about what that dream project might look like?
Well, I was thinking, just on dream collaborators quickly. I love Carlo Rovelli. He's got such a poetic and clean way of describing things like time or black holes or white holes, this whole white hole thing. Yeah, I find his writing really evocative. I was thinking we did a project about space-time a while ago, and we were kind of wrestling with this idea of, okay, wait a sec. So space and time are one fabric, and mass is stretching that fabric, and it's the more mass, the more the fabric stretches, but it's not happening in like a bed sheet getting stretched or a trampoline. It's happening as a volume. Like, how do you get your head around that? And so then we started thinking, yeah, if you had all these metronomes just in a huge volume. They're just almost like just floating in space, these metronomes. Then if you put like a black hole in the middle of that volume, then what it's doing is it's stretching space and time towards its singularity in the center. And so if you start thinking about what's happening to those metronomes, when they're ticking towards the black hole, they're going tick tock, tick tock. But the ones that are closer to the black hole are going, they've got to go further, because it's getting so stretched. And at the singularity, the tick never gets to tock. It just gets stretched to infinity. So that was all Carlo Rovelli was just like describing this stuff. I was like, we didn't even do that in the end, but I was thinking, so it's when you've got a really good scientist, they're able to, spark that kind of idea. Because, I know nothing about the mathematics that describes this stuff. I think probably to really understand those kind of complex ideas in general relativity and all of that, you really need probably an understanding of the maths to really appreciate it. But trying to translate it to something visual is what I love to do.
You've talked a lot about, what a potential dream project, like the speed of light. But is there something that you would love to create, or even something with audiences as well? Is there a way that you want to include a much, much larger audience in what you're doing, bring the whole world together?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, this idea of like embodiment and what is it like to be a bee or a tree or a photon of light meeting water in a leaf, you can start to think, well, you can explore this idea as like a sort of multiplayer game. And so if you're the water meeting the sunlight back in the leaf, the sunlight could be puppeteered by a person. They've gone on their own journey from the sun. And when you meet that sunlight, they're having an experience of this encounter with the water drop, and you're having this experience of the encounter with the light. And that when you touch, this fusion happens, and that maybe you go on. Maybe it's like if you go out as oxygen, that's one path, but if you get woven into the glucose, then suddenly there's like two of you sharing the embodiment of that journey. And so I think even just down to what it's like to be a dragonfly or a mosquito, and thinking about how our flavor of perception is uniquely human. And if you think about kind of like smearing or like dialing into the perception of other organisms, then the world becomes completely different. It's the same sort of area. Like a forest can be seen through so many different sensory perspectives. So, for example, the dragonfly is seeing ultraviolet and infrared. So you've got this broader color spectrum, much broader than the human eye. But you've also got a kind of reaction speed between what it sees, and that signal getting to the brain is so quick that it sees the world at like 300 frames a second, as opposed to our, we can get away with 25 frames a second. And when you're watching a film at 25 frames a second, you don't see any stills, it just flows. But for a dragonfly, that would be a really slow slideshow of like a sort of post collection, sort of like, this is really boring. And so you can kind of start to imagine space-time as elastic. How does it compress and expand depending on what you embody? So yeah, I can imagine that these sort of body experiences, getting your senses flavored by different organisms within an ecosystem, could just be like a really amazing virtual world that you can sort of set yourself adrift in. That's also rooted. I like the idea that in the way that TED Talks take experts in different fields and they work with those experts to kind of distill a really clean presentation. What is the equivalent of that translated to experience? But then why not have narrators take you on that journey? If you're a 5-year-old, you could have a narration targeted at your age. And if you're a PhD, you can have a narrator accompany you, almost like Richard Feynman, going for a walk with Richard Feynman and being able to ask him questions. You can imagine that as AI is progressing, we're not far off being able to do really customized educational experiences where you've got an AI trained on a combination of the world's best scientists that's able to articulate that information, but suitable to your level of understanding. Yeah, I can imagine it could be a real game changer. I mean, especially like I keep talking about photosynthesis because it needs a rebrand. It's so boring, isn't it? It's like, there's nothing to look at. It's just like an equation and some diagrams, but it is like the most spiritual experience you could ever have. In some ways, this sunlight is a really good metaphor for kind of God in a way. You look at the sun and it's blinding, so you can't see anything, but yet the sunlight flows through all living things. So it's like powering life, and also it illuminates all things so that you can see and touch and experience it. So the beauty of the world comes from that source. I mean, it doesn't need to be God in a religious sense, but it's just this interesting sort of metaphor of our relationship to the sun, including the fact that we're made out of exploded stars. I mean, so the whole thing goes on. You can take that as a sort of metaphor for us as a sort of on a spiritual level. I mean, I'm a big fan in the sort of Zen lens on things. I heard existence described like this, which is a real peach. I'm terrible with names. I can't remember the name of the guy. It's a bit rude to take other people's stories and not reference them, but I can't remember the guy's name at the moment. But he was talking essentially about this guy, John Smith, is going to go on stage and he's going to perform King Lear. And to perform King Lear, he puts on this exquisite multicolored gown. When he steps onto stage, he can't be John Smith and King Lear at the same time. He has to forget John Smith, and in order to experience being King Lear and to like perform. And so what if John Smith is like the source of all being, kind of like maybe, whatever the source that created all of time and space is, that's John Smith. And then in order for that source to experience being Barney or Jessie or my dog Dodo or a slug or anything in that web of time space, it has to forget what it was in order to experience what it is. But every stitch in that fabric of space time, think of that cloak that John Smith puts on. Like every stitch is a different point in space time, and every stitch is a slightly different flavor of experience. And so John Smith is experiencing all of it, like the entire cosmos simultaneously, but it has to forget its source in order to experience being me, because you can't experience Barney as well as being like the source of the whole thing. And yeah, I love that description. I mean, I don't know whether these ideas are actually true or not. I don't know if anyone can ever really know them, but the poetry of it was just like, that feels like it could be right. There's a sort of Zen Buddhist lens on existence. That might be the ticket.
How did you get inspiration to go down this route, in your life, be it technology or spiritualism? Have you got an experience in your life that kind of threw you in that particular direction and you're doing what you do today?
Yeah, I had when I was like 11, I've got lovely, encouraging parents and an amazing family and a twin brother and just a great vibe. And raised as a Christian, I was doing my prayers every evening, and I had a moment where I was sort of going through I had a kind of list where I'd pray for Spider-Man and B.A. Baracus and other people to find God, and I'd sort of just, it wasn't particularly profound. I'd sort of do my routine, but then I had a sudden like being struck by lightning moment. And it was almost like a fire hose was plugged into the top of my head. And in the fire hose was like ice cold liquid love. And it was pulled on to like full power. And it was like bursting out of every pore in my body. It was well intense. I've never had an experience like it since. And yeah, so I just got completely flooded. It made me stand up and sing and unleashed my full jazz. So I was like, what? It was mad. And then that gave me a real curiosity of like, what? Wait a second. And then when the internet came about, I was like, what? I was like, oh, being electrocuted by pure love, overwhelming joy, and like, and then it comes up sort of our Kundalini experience, and it's like, oh, this is happening in loads of different spiritual disciplines. Actually, it's happening everywhere, all over the world, in lots of different forms, and that maybe if you think about lightning strikes, when you're on the surface of the Earth, you see a lightning strike. But when you're up in the space station, you see lightning as like going like, it's happening everywhere all the time. And I was thinking about how maybe religions are sort of people who've had particularly profound lightning strikes, real goodies, Jesus and others that actually there's an experience maybe at the source of it that then stories and language are built up around in order to try and describe this thing, but the essence of it is just all the same thing. And a little bit like, I think it was Rumi was saying, like, religions are like fingers pointing at the moon, but they're not the moon. And and so it felt a little bit like that. It sort of gave me this curiosity to explore, and what is that essence of love feeling? What's going on there? So yeah, I guess so. Since then, I've just been really. I think the way I would describe it is completely open. I'm just open. My funnel is as wide as possible, and I'm interested in everything. And I'm not necessarily, and I think it's all a bit of a mystery as well. So there's not necessarily a kind of hard edge to like, oh, I've discovered this thing and this is what I believe.
Is there anything that you would want, to pass on to a younger generation, those kind of aspiring artists, the future technologists, where would you kind of, what words would you say to guide them in a similar path to what Marshmallow Laser Feast has done?
Well, peacocks. So back to whatever that energy is that resulted in the peacocks and sequoia trees and you, and then like it's a creative force that's it's flowing through you constantly. And so a life dedicated to sort of exploring that energy flowing through you, like investing in it, like making music, making art. You could say that an artistic way of living is just is basically diving into that peacock juice and exploring it, and just like whether you're spraffing feathers into a musical career or whatever it is, I think you feel most alive and sort of present when you're exploring that sort of artistic juice within yourself. And often, like, there's also this thing that you discover is that the more you do it, the more you sort of find yourself on that journey, because it is a journey inward in a way, as well as to do with observation, but there's a sort of inward journey to it. And there's also moments where if you haven't made anything, no one's going to commission you. You're not going to build a career out of anything until you actually decide to make the first thing yourself. No one's going to pay you to do anything until you've proven so that basically self-investing with your time and your passion and working and practicing and doing your thing. Yeah, that's the way to do it. And I think as this career, because I can happily call myself an artist now, but there was a time when I was probably a graphic designer or an animator, or then a director, like directing commercials and music videos. But because me and Robin did the whole dance of investing in our passion projects, and it's the result of investing in that's led to this kind of clarity that I'm talking about now. Whereas if I wasn't nurturing that, I'd probably just be directing commercials and doing other stuff. So just diving into the deep end, get the peacock feathers out. That's the thing.
I love that. I've just got one last question for you. It's just what's the next project? Such an easy question.
There's a few. So Robin, at the moment, Marshmallow Laser Feast, we've got 3 creative forces. There's Ersin Han Ersin, Robin McNicholas, and me. And we all cross-pollinate on projects, and we tend to like direct our own projects, but there's constant cross-pollination, and that's like, we just really enjoy that process. It always leads to more surprising outcomes. And so Robin has a project called Sweet Dreams, which is launching at Manchester International. And that's a super playful and whacked out exploration of like the stories that flavor the things we eat. So it's kind of looking at the food that we eat and the kind of food mascots and iconography and stories that sit as a kind of layer between us and the underlying reality of where our food comes from. So that's a really wild project. And Robin's got like a kind of creative juice that's much more wacky. I think at the moment I'm like really into like nature observation and which is a bit more chin scratchy and less playful. And Ersin as well is on this journey with me into like forests and trees. But Robin's going in a direction of much more playful experimental work, which is lovely. And then okay, so the project that I'm trying to get off the ground at the moment is, it's like the next chapter of Evolver, the human body, journey of breath through the human body. And so this next chapter is like, what would it be like to have an out-of-body experience within your own body where you get to experience your senses being stimulated, but also witness how your senses work. So, for example, you could be inside your eyeball in virtual reality, and that could be like this huge ball that's, as I'm looking left and right, this huge ball is turning left and right, so you're able to see it, and you can see how the light is coming through, and the picture's upside down. It gets converted to electrochemical signals that are going into the brain, and you can wander into the brain and see. I guess it's get an idea that really everything that you could ever experience is an electrochemical signal going into a black box of the brain, and it's getting processed, and that's what's generating your experience. Like it's a crazy thing. So it's this sort of being able to explore your senses, but also with know what you're looking at because you're in virtual reality. So the picture that you're seeing on this giant eyeball is going to be actually what you're seeing. It's quite, and the same with hearing. You can be hearing, maybe we're playing with specific tones, exploring neuroaesthetics, but if I hear it in my right ear and I'm stood just inside my little ear hole there, it's stood in this giant cave, and I wander in, I can see the way that the sound waves are moving like wind through a cornfield. And as those little hairs are getting stimulated, different points on that are picking up different frequencies of sound. And so you sort of like, okay, it's a frequency shift. I can see that different parts of the hair are stimulated. And again, that's turning into electrochemical signals that illuminate a part of the brain. So I love that idea of sort of wandering in and out and kind of getting this, even down to like somebody tickling your finger, and you could be up in the head, but you could see the illumination down the whole arm, but in sync with someone tickling your finger. Maybe the way of doing it would be you have this experience where your senses are tickled, and then afterwards you become the sense tickler. So when the next person comes in, you're handed a peacock feather, an ice cube, and certain things, and you explore like I don't know. So that's one thing that we are just starting to work on. I think there's lots of experiences within the human body that are going to be pretty wild to dive into, and then again, just I want to do the photosynthesis deep dive. So that's they're top of the list for me.
I feel like you've only just scratched the surface of like what you want to creatively do, especially with the body. I mean, there's there's so much more, so much depth to it as well, and it's like I suppose how do you prioritize all these incredible ideas and discoveries that you want to take people on and hold their hand visually? It's one of those things you have to take a step back, breathe, and just like let's just calm down. And
it's a journey, isn't it? It's like we're a shrub, and maybe we're producing our first flowers now. Yeah. But one day we're going to be like a big old oak tree, and the whole that's the way. That would be nice. So there's that would be nice to sort of it does feel like we're doing experiments at this stage, and that as the medium finds its place. I mean, let's face it, it's weird, right? In a time where humans are living more and more urban existences, where we're kind of getting our attention's getting hooked onto like screen time, and we're probably more detached from nature than we've ever been. The idea of like connecting to nature through the most immersive screen time, attention grabbing device to ever exist, this virtual reality, which
Yeah.
like right now it's super early days. Apple have got their Vision
Very,
Pro. It's the worst headset they'll ever make. And
yeah.
where's that going to be in 10 years time? So for sure, there's something slightly ironic about it, but I do feel a calling to work in this medium, and that maybe, when I'm Attenborough's age, that there'll be a kind of a legacy of work that branches out and tickles people into a sense of, like, the biggest blessing would just be, you look at your own body and you're like, I just can't, it's just, the whole thing is so unlikely and complex and beautiful that you just have a deeper appreciation for just waking up in the morning and being like, what is going on?
Yeah.
And I'm lucky to have that by default for whatever reason. So I'm trying to like share that with people.
Because I really understand your love of nature and science, but with technology, it's almost like you're shaking hands with it. You haven't given it a full hug yet. You're like, I respect you and I love the direction you're going. I want to see what we can do together.
Hmm.
And there's this whole question around, like, obviously, you mentioned screen time, but then AI, very zeitgeist at the moment. You have the artificial brain, you have the organic brain and nature, and just how they bond. So I'm quite interested to see what your view is with AI, but also the impact that might have on human experience and immersive experiences.
Yeah, I mean, AI is just sort of galloping ahead, and it seems clear that it's such a powerful tool that it's going to change many aspects of our lives. But it is still a tool, and it's still something that people employ in order to do something.
It is, yeah.
And so it was something so powerful. I think it's got lots of dangers, and I mean, even just down to the fact that if you want to sort of fake a photo shoot and you want it in the style of David Bailey, you don't need to go to David Bailey. You can just be like in the style of David Bailey, or like you can sort of like fine tune these things already to a point where, I want to write an artist statement, and I can just kind of, I suppose in a way, lots of people are quite good. Like once you've got a vision of what you want to make, and your vision of what you want to make comes not in isolation, but in relationship to all the books that you read and everything else. So we are these kind of sponges, but we can never read everything on the internet. And so the AI tools are kind of super powerful, certainly with the things that I'm interested in. They're super powerful for consolidating information. And I can also imagine that training AIs on like specific data sets, and then being able to generate virtual worlds, almost like manifest them through spoken word into being. Obviously, that's a way off, but you could imagine that a lot of the work that we're making that takes like years, months or years, at some point can just be spoken into being at any moment, and appear to you as a mixed reality, sort of overlay on reality. Kind of, yeah, I guess, I was thinking like Alan Watts. I love listening to Alan Watts.
Yeah.
And you could imagine that you've just kind of got like Alan Watts, like a little budgie sits on your shoulder, you just have a chat with him, he knows everything about you. He's like your therapist and your spirit guide, tells a great story, reads you your bedtime stories. Yeah, I think it's kind of wild. I was also thinking about apps that you're not going to have people making apps, because you're just going to voice command an app into being based on the function you need to solve. It's just going to, if you're in a house and you want them to imagine like sort of, I don't know, some furniture, you just be able to talk through things and see them as digital overlays, and like, oh, you've got to move a plug socket let's see through the wall to the wiring of the plugs, or you can just imagine this sort of strange blended reality potentially where you're interacting with light that looks photorealistic. I don't know, it gets creepy. I'm not quite sure where it's all going, but I do love to do a breathing meditation under a tree.
Let's bring it back to that. Calm those thoughts. Barney, thank you so much. Thank you for letting me into your world for the last hour or so.
Pleasure,
And
Jesse. Thanks a lot, mate.
It's been wonderful to talk to you. I loved it. And best of luck tomorrow at over in Cannes.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. We're up for an award, but there's some amazing work. So we're not holding out any hope, but if we get it, that'll be a bonus. But yeah, it's been lovely to chat. And when you're in town, come visit the studio, and we can set you adrift in some of this stuff.
I'd love to. Yeah, definitely. Lovely. Thank you so much, Barney. I will speak to you soon. See you soon.
Cheers, mate. Thanks a lot. Cheers.
So that was Barney Steel from Marshmallow Laser Feast. And what a experience to be let into his vision just for a little bit on the Electric Art Podcast. Really delving into nature, the process, the journey of life as it moves through us, and how we're all connected, and highlighting the role of technology and bringing that all together. Thank you, everyone, for joining me on the Electric Art Podcast, and until next time.